Andrea, we simply don't have that kind of money available right now. My father stood in my kitchen doorway, his arms folded across his chest like a bouncer blocking entry to a club. My mother sat at my kitchen table, examining her perfectly manicured nails, avoiding my eyes completely. I stood there holding a folder of medical documents, my hands shaking so badly the papers rattled. Down the hall, I could hear my 5-year-old son Theo wheezing in his sleep despite the breathing treatments I'd given him an hour ago. The medical estimates were spread across my counter like a ransom note. $95,000. That's what the specialist at Johns Hopkins quoted for the bone marrow transplant that would save Theo's life. His leukemia had relapsed for the second time, and his little body couldn't handle another round of standard chemotherapy. Without this transplant, the oncologist gave him 4 months. Maybe 6 if we were lucky. My name is Andrea, and I'm 32 years old. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, working as an elementary school teacher while raising Theo by myself. His father, my ex-boyfriend Kyle, disappeared when Theo was diagnosed at age 2. Just vanished one day, changed his number, moved out of state. I haven't heard from him in 3 years. No child support. No birthday cards. Nothing. I've been fighting this battle completely alone, working summer school, tutoring on weekends, selling everything I own just to keep up with the medical bills that never stop coming. My parents live 45 minutes away in Scottsdale, in their beautiful house with the pool and the 3-car garage. The same house where my older brother Brett still has his college football jersey framed on the wall like he played in the NFL. He's 36 now, works as a financial advisor, drives a Tesla, and has always been the son who could do no right in their eyes. The golden boy who got everything handed to him while I got lectures about responsibility. Available? I repeated, my voice cracking. Dad, Theo is dying. The doctors said without this transplant, he has maybe 4 months. How is money not available for that? My mother finally looked up, but her expression was cold. Detached. Like I was a stranger asking for directions, not her daughter begging to save her grandson. Sweetheart, we've already helped you so much over the years. We paid for his first treatment. We gave you money for the hospital bills. We can't keep dipping into our retirement every time there's a medical emergency. Every time there's a medical emergency. Like Theo's cancer was a recurring inconvenience. Like his bone marrow failing was something he chose to do to burden them. I'm not asking you to empty your accounts. I'll pay you back. Every dollar. I'll get a second job. I'll work nights. I'll do whatever it takes. Just please, I need this now because Theo doesn't have time for me to save up. My father shook his head, his jaw set in that stubborn way that meant the conversation was over. Andrea, you can barely afford your rent as it is. How exactly are you going to pay back $95,000? You need to be realistic. There are payment plans. Medical financing options. You should explore those instead of coming to us. I had explored them. I'd spent 3 weeks calling every program, every charity, every financial company I could find. The payment plans would take too long to arrange. Theo needed the transplant within 8 weeks, or his body would be too weak. The medical financing companies all wanted interest rates over 20%, and most rejected me anyway because I already had $43,000 in medical debt from his previous treatments. I've tried everything else, I said quietly, feeling tears burn behind my eyes. You're my last hope. Please. He's your grandson. My mother stood up, smoothing her designer blouse. The same blouse she'd worn to her country club luncheon last week, where the entry fee was more than my monthly grocery budget. Honey, I know this is difficult, but we have to think about our future too. We're both over 60 now. We can't risk everything we've worked for on something that might not even succeed. Might not even succeed. The doctors had given Theo a 75% chance of full remission with the transplant. But to her, those odds weren't worth the investment. I need to think about this more, my father said, moving toward the door. We'll discuss it and get back to you. When? I asked desperately. When will you get back to me? Soon. He didn't look at me as he said it. They left 5 minutes later, and I stood at the window watching their Mercedes SUV pull away. The same SUV they'd bought new last year. Paid in cash. I'd heard my father brag about it at Easter dinner. I walked down the hall to Theo's room and sat on the floor beside his bed. He looked so small under his dinosaur comforter, his face pale, his breathing labored. Dark circles under his eyes made him look ancient instead of 5. I reached through the bed rails and held his tiny hand, feeling the tears come. His own grandparents had just sealed his fate, and he was too sick to even know it. The next morning, I started making calls. Every relative I could think of. Cousins I hadn't spoken to since high school. My mother's sister. My father's brother. Anyone who might help. Most offered sympathy and small amounts. $20 here. $50 there. My Aunt Linda sent $400 with a card saying she wished it could be more. I was grateful for every penny, but I was trying to fill the ocean with a teaspoon. For weeks later, I came home from parent-teacher conferences to find Theo collapsed on the bathroom floor. He'd been trying to get to the toilet, and his legs gave out. His lips had a blue tinge that sent panic shooting through my chest. I called 911, my teacher training kicking in even as my hands shook. They stabilized him at the hospital, but Dr. Chen pulled me aside with the expression I'd learned to dread over the past 3 years. Andrea, his counts are dropping faster than we anticipated, Dr. Chen said, her voice gentle but firm. Without that transplant, I'd say he has 2 months now. Maybe 3 if we're very lucky. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. My baby had 2 months unless I found $95,000. 2 months to watch him fade away. I launched a fundraising campaign that night, writing from my heart, posting every photo I had of Theo smiling before the cancer took his energy. Friends shared it. Other teachers donated. Parents from my school contributed. But after 4 weeks, I'd raised $11,000. It wasn't even close to enough. Then Brett called. My brother's voice was excited, almost giddy, like a kid on Christmas morning. Andrea, I have amazing news. Vanessa said yes. We're engaged. I try to feel happy despite the weight crushing my chest. That's wonderful, Brett. Congratulations. I know, right? And get this, Mom and Dad are being incredible about the wedding. They're paying for everything. The whole thing. Vanessa, and I can have whatever we want. No budget at all. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles went white. No budget? None. Dad said this is his son's big day, and money is no object. We're thinking destination wedding. Maybe Tuscany or the French Riviera. Vanessa's always dreamed of getting married in a castle. We're meeting with wedding planners next week. The wedding won't be until next year, but we want to start planning now to make it perfect. I stood in my tiny apartment, medical bills covering every surface, my son's breathing machine humming in the next room, and listened to my brother talk about castles and unlimited budgets. Something cold and hard formed in my chest. Understanding. Clear and brutal. The months that followed were a nightmare. I maxed out 3 credit cards. Took out personal loans at rates that would destroy me for years. Sold my grandmother's engagement ring for $900. Sold my car and started taking the bus everywhere. Moved from my 2-bedroom apartment to a 1-bedroom to save $300 a month. Cut out everything. No heat unless it was below 40 degrees. Rice and beans for every meal. No new clothes. Nothing. And through it all, Brett's wedding plans grew like wildfire. Every family dinner, every phone call, every interaction somehow circled back to the wedding. My parents were consumed by it. They flew to Italy to tour venues. They attended wine tastings at restaurants that cost more per person than my electric bill. They discussed floral arrangements that cost more than my monthly salary. I tried to be happy for Brett. Part of me wanted to be. He was my brother. We'd been close as kids before life pulled us in different directions. But that closeness had died over the years as it became clear our parents saw us differently. Brett was the achiever, the successful one, the son who made them proud. I was the one who got pregnant by a deadbeat, who chose teaching over a real career, who couldn't even keep her kid healthy. One evening in August, my mother called. Andrea, honey, we need to talk about the wedding. What about it? I was exhausted, having just finished a tutoring session and spent 2 hours at the hospital with Theo. Well, Brett wants you to be in the wedding party. Vanessa is having 8 bridesmaids, and the dresses are going to be about $500 each. We need you to order yours by next week. $500. That was 2 weeks of Theo's medications. I don't think I can afford that right now, Mom. There was a pause, then a sigh. Andrea, this is your brother's wedding. It's important. I know, but Theo's treatment costs are really high right now, and I'm barely making rent. You're always talking about money problems. My mother's voice got sharp, impatient. I understand Theo is sick, but life continues for the rest of us. This is Brett's special day. Can't you make this work? I closed my eyes and counted to 10. Can I think about it? The deadline is next Friday. Vanessa has her heart set on having you there. It would really hurt Brett if you said no. After we hung up, I sat in the dark and cried. Not sad crying. Angry crying. How had my family become so disconnected from reality? My son was dying, and they were worried about matching dresses and hurt feelings over a party. Theo's condition continued to decline. The transplant was no longer just urgent. It was critical. His body was shutting down. Every day I watched him get weaker, his bright personality dimming along with his physical strength. He stopped asking when he could go back to kindergarten. Stopped talking about wanting to be a police officer like the ones who visited his school. He knew, somehow, that time was running out. I took a leave of absence from teaching. Unpaid, which meant losing my only income. But I needed to be with Theo. My principal was understanding, more understanding than my own parents had been. I applied for every assistance program, every grant, every charity. Most had waiting lists 6 months long. Theo didn't have 6 months. In September, 4 months after my parents refused to help, Brett's engagement party happened. My mother called the next day to tell me about it. They'd rented out a private room at the most exclusive restaurant in Scottsdale. 120 guests. Open bar with top-shelf liquor. Past appetizers that probably cost $50 per person. A string quartet. You should have seen it, Andrea. My mother's voice was dreamy. It was like something from a magazine. Vanessa looked radiant. How much did it cost? I asked, unable to stop myself. Oh, I'm not sure exactly. Your father handled the details. I think around $15,000? But it was worth every penny. You should have seen everyone's faces. $15,000. More than 15% of what could save Theo. Spent on one party to announce a wedding that was still 10 months away. That sounds really nice, I said, my voice flat and dead. You know, Andrea, I'm worried about you. You sound so negative all the time. Maybe if you tried to focus on positive things instead of dwelling on problems, you'd feel better. Vanessa manages to stay cheerful even though she works 60 hours a week. Vanessa's job didn't involve watching her child die. But I didn't say that. I just hung up. October brought Theo's 6th birthday. I made him cupcakes from a box mix because I couldn't afford anything else. He was too weak to blow out the candles, so I helped him. My parents sent a card with $25 inside. They didn't visit. They had a cake-tasting appointment for the wedding. In November, 5 months after my parents said no, Brett's bachelor party happened. My father called to tell me all about it. They'd rented a mansion in Sedona for the weekend. 20 of Brett's closest friends. Golf, poker, catered meals, open bar, private chef. It was incredible, my father said, his voice full of pride. Brett deserved a proper send-off before married life. How much? I asked, already knowing I didn't want the answer. Well, I don't know the exact figure. Maybe $18,000? But you only get married once. We wanted it to be memorable. $18,000 on a weekend party. Almost 20% of what could save Theo's life. Spent on golf and poker and drinking. That sounds fun, Dad. My voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. You know, your mother is concerned about you. You've been so distant lately. So cold. This negativity isn't healthy, Andrea. You need to find a way to be more positive. Maybe if someone had helped me save my son, I'd have something to be positive about. That's exactly what I mean. You're always playing the victim. At some point, you need to take responsibility for your own life. I hung up. I couldn't listen anymore. Theo collapsed again in early December. This time it was a seizure. His small body convulsed for 3 minutes while I held him, crying and praying and begging God to let him live. The hospital kept him for 5 days. Dr. Chen sat me down on day 3 with tears in her own eyes. Andrea, we need to talk about hospice, she said softly. Theo's body is giving up. Maybe it's time to focus on keeping him comfortable instead of fighting.
How long?
The question came out as a whisper.
Weeks.
Maybe a month if we're lucky.
I'm so sorry.
1 month. Maybe. That was Christmas. Maybe New Year's if we were lucky. Then nothing. I called my parents from the hospital chapel. My mother answered, sounding distracted. Andrea, we're right in the middle of the final venue walkthrough. Can this wait? Theo is dying. The words felt like broken glass in my throat.
Dr. Chun says weeks.
Maybe a month.
I think you should come say goodbye.
Silence. Then Oh, Andrea. That's terrible. Of course we'll come. When?
Now. He's asking for you.
We can't right now. We're in Italy. We came for the final venue tour and menu tasting. We fly back Thursday. We'll come Friday morning. They were in Italy, looking at a wedding venue, while their grandson was dying. Please come as soon as you can, I said, and hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. They came Friday afternoon, not morning. They brought a teddy bear from the airport gift shop and stayed 18 minutes. Theo was barely conscious, his breathing shallow. My mother cried a little, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My father stood by the door, checking his phone. We have to go, my father finally said. The florist needs final approval on the centerpiece design. The wedding is only 6 weeks away, and there are a million details. The florist. 4 centerpieces. While Theo lay dying.
Of course, I said.
Don't let me keep you. We'll come back tomorrow, my mother promised. They didn't come back. Brett never came at all. He was too busy with wedding preparations. The tuxedo shop had ordered the wrong color vest for the groomsmen. This required multiple trips and phone calls to fix. Theo died on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before Brett's wedding. I was holding his hand, reading him his favorite book about dinosaurs even though he couldn't respond anymore. He took one last rattling breath, and then he was gone. The nurse who pronounced him dead cried more than my parents would when I finally called to tell them. My mother's first words after I told her Theo was gone. Oh no. Oh, Andrea. What terrible timing. Terrible timing. Because the funeral would interfere with wedding preparations. That was the moment something fundamental broke inside me. The grief was overwhelming, suffocating. But underneath it, I felt something else growing. Cold. Patient.
Clear.
They'd made their choice. Now I would make mine. The funeral was scheduled for Friday, 2 days before Brett's Sunday wedding. I didn't ask them to change the wedding date. I knew what they'd say. What I didn't expect was for them to ask me to change the funeral. My mother called Wednesday morning. Andrea, sweetheart, we need to discuss the funeral timing. I was packing Theo's clothes to donate. His favorite superhero shirt. His collection of toy cars. The books we'd read together every night. What about it? Friday is really problematic for us. The rehearsal is Friday afternoon, and the rehearsal dinner is that evening. All the out-of-town guests are arriving. Brett is giving a speech. We can't miss it. Could you possibly do the funeral on Thursday? Or maybe next week after the wedding? I stared at the wall, unable to process what I was hearing. You want me to change my son's funeral because it conflicts with rehearsal dinner? It's not just the dinner, Andrea. It's the whole weekend. We have hair appointments Saturday morning. Final dress fitting for your mother. The photographer wants to do some pre-wedding shots. It's all scheduled. The funeral home should be able to accommodate Thursday. It would work better for everyone. Everyone. Better for everyone to bury my 5-year-old son a day early so they don't miss cocktail hour. I hung up without answering. The funeral stayed scheduled for Friday. I paid for it with money borrowed from my principal and a loan from a teacher's credit union.
40 people came.
Co-workers from school. Some nurses from the hospital. Neighbors. A few parents of students I'd taught. My parents arrived 50 minutes late, dressed in clothes clearly chosen for the wedding weekend. Designer outfits. Expensive shoes. They stayed for the service, but left immediately after, skipping the small gathering at a restaurant nearby. We really have to run, my mother said, kissing the air near my cheek. Brett is having a crisis about the seating chart, and Vanessa is upset about the table linens. But it was a beautiful service, Andrea. Very touching. Touching. My son's funeral was touching. I watched them leave, watched them drive away to their important appointments, their critical emergencies. I felt something inside me turn to ice. The grief was still there, but it was frozen now.
Contained.
And underneath it was something else. Purpose. That night, I pulled out my notebooks and started documenting everything. Every conversation. Every refusal. Every dollar amount. When I asked for help. When they said no. When the wedding planning started. When Theo died. Who came to the funeral? Who didn't? Every expense my mother had mentioned. I wrote it all down, organized it, dated it. I wasn't sure yet what I'd do with this information, but I knew I needed it. Evidence.
Proof.
A record of everything they'd taken from Theo. From me. Sunday, Brett's wedding day, I spent alone in my apartment. My phone buzzed constantly with photos from the family group chat. My mother kept sending updates, like I'd asked for them. Wish you were here, for this beautiful day. Brett looks so handsome. Vanessa is absolutely stunning in her dress. The venue is like a dream. I looked at each photo with cold detachment. The castle venue in Tuscany. The elaborate floral arrangements. Brett in his designer tuxedo. Vanessa in a dress that proba. Bly cost more than a car. My parents dancing, their faces glowing with joy. The 7-tier wedding cake. The ice sculptures. The live orchestra playing on a stage covered in roses. I learned later that the total cost of Brett's wedding was $320,000. $320,000. More than 3 times what could have saved Theo's life. Spent on one day. One party. The venue alone was $110,000. More than what I'd needed. The flowers were $25,000. The catering was $60,000. Vanessa's dress was $12,000. The photographer was $18,000. The band was $20,000. The alcohol was $15,000. I learned these numbers slowly, through overheard conversations and my mother's casual mentions. She had no idea what each figure did to me. Or maybe she did, and simply didn't care. I set my phone down and made myself a promise. This wasn't over. They thought they could let Theo die, throw their party, and move on like nothing happened. They thought their money and their comfort and their priorities could exist without consequences. They were wrong. I didn't know how yet, but I would make them understand what they'd done. Not revenge. Justice. A reckoning. The weeks after the wedding blurred together. I returned to work because I had no choice. Bills don't stop when your child dies. The medical debt was still there. $71,000 even after Theo was gone. The credit cards were maxed. Another $28,000. My rent was 2 months behind. Theo's death hadn't ended my financial nightmare. It just made it meaningless. My parents called occasionally. Brief check-ins that felt like obligations. How are you holding up? They'd ask, then fill the silence with updates about Brett's honeymoon in Bali, about renovations they were planning, about upcoming trips. They never mentioned Theo. It was like he'd never existed. Like acknowledging his absence might ruin their good mood. Brett sent one text 2 weeks after the wedding. Sorry about everything.
Hope you're doing okay.
Sorry about everything. Like my son dying was a minor setback we all had to endure. In March, for months after Theo's death, my parents invited me to Easter dinner. I almost declined, but curiosity won. I needed to see them, to understand how they lived with what they'd done. Their house looked like a showroom. Professional decorations everywhere. The smell of catered food. Brett and Vanessa were already there when I arrived, both tanned and relaxed from their 3-week honeymoon. Both laughing about something on their phones.
Andrea.
My mother hugged me, her perfume overwhelming. I'm so glad you came. We've missed you. I stood stiff, unresponsive. Thanks for having me. Dinner was elaborate. Prime rib, lobster tails, expensive wine. Everyone talked and laughed, sharing stories from the wedding, from the honeymoon, from their comfortable lives. I sat silent, pushing food around my plate, feeling like a ghost. Andrea, you're so quiet, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Are you all right?
I'm fine.
You know, Brett and I were talking. Maybe you should consider a fresh start. Move somewhere new. Phoenix has too many sad memories. You could start over somewhere cheaper. I looked at this woman who'd married into my family 4 months ago and now felt entitled to give me life advice. Where would I go? I don't know. Maybe somewhere in the Midwest? Cost of living is so much lower. You could actually get ahead financially instead of always struggling. Get ahead. While drowning in medical debt from trying to save my son. I'll think about it, I lied. My father cleared his throat. Andrea, your mother and I have been discussing your situation. We think you should declare bankruptcy. It's the responsible thing to do. Bankruptcy for medical bills you'll never pay off on a teacher's salary. Better to wipe the slate clean and start fresh. Start fresh. Like Theo was a mistake to be erased. We could help you find a good bankruptcy attorney, my mother added. Your father knows several through his business connections. I set my fork down carefully. You know what would have actually helped? $95,000 6 months ago. The table went silent. Vanessa looked at Brett uncomfortably. My mother's smile froze in place. Andrea, my father said, his voice carrying a warning. We've discussed this. Have we? Because I don't remember us ever really discussing it. You said no, and that was it. End of conversation. We made a difficult financial decision based on our circumstances at that time. Your circumstances? I gestured around the room at the expensive everything. This doesn't look like financial hardship. The $320,000 wedding doesn't suggest you were struggling. Vanessa's face flushed red. That's not fair. That was different.
How?
How is it different? It was an investment in family, in celebration, in life, my mother said, her voice shaking. Theo was sick. The doctors said there was no guarantee the transplant would work. We weren't going to throw away money on something uncertain. But you'd throw away more than 3 times that amount on flowers that died the next day, on food that got thrown away, on a party that lasted 6 hours. Get out, my father said, standing up. His face was red with anger. If you're going to be disrespectful, you need to leave. I grabbed my coat. Don't worry, I'm going. You're just bitter because your life didn't work out, Brett called after me. It's not our fault you made bad choices. I stopped at the door and turned back. They were all standing now, united against me. My parents, my brother, his wife. All comfortable, secure, righteous in their decisions. Bad choices? I repeated. Like trusting family? Like thinking blood meant something? Like believing you'd choose your grandson over ice sculptures and champagne towers? I walked out into the spring evening and got into my beat-up car. Through the window, I watched them settle back to their expensive dinner, probably already dismissing me as dramatic, ungrateful, unstable. That was the last time I spoke to any of them for 4 years. Life continued because it had to. I declared bankruptcy as my father suggested, wiping out most of my medical debt, but destroying my credit for 7 years. I moved to an even cheaper apartment in a worse neighborhood. I worked summer school and tutored every evening, sometimes 6 days a week, just to stay above water. I existed but didn't really live. I also planned. I couldn't do anything yet. I was too broken, too powerless, too consumed with grief and survival. But I was patient. I watched from a distance, following their lives on social media, through accounts they didn't know I could see. I documented everything, adding to my notebooks. I waited. Brett and Vanessa had a baby a year after their wedding. A girl named Isabella. My mother posted constant updates. The pregnancy journey, the baby shower, the nursery reveal. Photos showed my parents beaming, holding their first grandchild. Like Theo had never existed. I saw one comment on my mother's Facebook post, "Your first grandbaby. So exciting." My mother's response, "We're absolutely over the moon. She's our whole world." Not a correction. Not a single mention that another grandchild had existed, had fought for his life, had mattered. Theo had been erased from the family story. I screenshot it and added it to my evidence file. 2 years after Theo's death, I went back to school. Online classes at night while working full-time, pursuing a master's degree in education administration. I was promoted to assistant principal after 2 years. The salary increase was modest, but it was progress. I was building something. I also started saving money. Every extra dollar went into a separate account I never touched. I didn't know what I was saving for exactly, but I knew I'd need resources eventually. Power requires capital. During those years, my parents tried to reach out occasionally. Birthday cards with generic messages. Christmas gifts sent through the mail, usually gift cards to stores I never shopped at. My father called once to tell me they'd started a college fund for Isabella and asked if I wanted to contribute. I hung up on him. Brett sent a birth announcement when they had their second child, a boy named Jackson. The card showed their perfect family in matching white outfits, professional photo, everyone smiling. On the back, someone had written, "Hope you're doing well." I kept every card, every announcement, every casual dismissal. Evidence. For years after Theo's death, I was an elementary school principal, earning enough to live comfortably. I'd rebuilt myself from nothing, created a life with purpose even without the person who'd given it meaning. Then, one morning in early fall, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject: Family Emergency. Andrea, this is your Aunt Linda. I'm reaching out because I thought you should know. Your father's investment firm collapsed 3 months ago. Securities fraud. Federal investigation. He lost everything. His license, his reputation, his entire retirement account. Your parents are facing foreclosure. They're in serious financial trouble. I know you two aren't in contact anymore, but I thought you deserved to know. They're too proud to ask for help, but they desperately need it. Please consider calling. Love, Linda. I read it 3 times. Then I started searching. News articles came up immediately. My father's firm had been running a scheme for years.
Client lost a million.
My father's name was mentioned in every article. Charges pending. Assets frozen. I sat back and stared at the screen. After building their comfortable life on the grave of my son's memory, they'd lost everything. Justice. Karma. The universe correcting itself. My phone rang a week later. My father's number. I watched it ring, then go to voicemail. He called again the next day. And the next. I never answered. Then came a knock on my door one evening in October. I looked through the peephole and saw my father standing there. He looked older than I remembered. Grayer. Thinner. Broken. I opened the door, but left the chain on. Yes, Andrea. His voice cracked on my name. Please, we need to talk. About what? Can I come in?
No.
He flinched like I'd slapped him. I know things have been strained between us. I know we've made mistakes. But we're family. We need help. Help. I lost everything. You probably heard. We're in serious financial trouble. The house is in foreclosure. Your mother has health issues and no insurance. We're asking our children for help. Brett and Vanessa are doing what they can, but they have 2 kids now. We thought maybe you could contribute something. Even a loan we could pay back eventually. A loan. Pay back eventually. How much do you need? Hope flared in his eyes. We owe about $125,000 on the house. If we could get that, we could keep it. But any amount would help. Even $30,000 would buy us some time. $125,000. More than what could have saved Theo. I'll think about it, I said, and closed the door in his face. I leaned against it and smiled. A cold, satisfied smile. Finally, after 4 years of waiting, of planning, of building myself back up, the opportunity had arrived. Now came the reckoning. I didn't contact my parents for 3 weeks. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Let them feel the crushing anxiety of uncertainty, of hoping, of being completely powerless. Every day that passed, their situation worsened. I knew because I started monitoring the foreclosure listings. Their house was scheduled for auction in 42 days. During those 3 weeks, my mother called 31 times. My father called 19. Brett sent 6 long text messages explaining how our parents had always done their best, how they were good people who'd made some mistakes, how family was supposed to help each other. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I responded to none of them. Instead, I researched their financial situation thoroughly. Public records showed everything. The house was worth $450,000. They owed $125,000. They had equity, but not enough to maintain their lifestyle. They'd have to downsize significantly, move to a small apartment, live on whatever Social Security they could collect. It would be hard,
Humbling.
a complete reversal of everything they'd built. But they'd survive. That was the critical difference.
They weren't going to die.
They were just going to be uncomfortable. On day 22, I finally called my father back. He answered immediately. Andrea, Thank God. I was terrified you wouldn't respond. I've been thinking about your request. And? The desperation in his voice was pathetic. I want to meet. All of you.
Sit down.
They arranged themselves on my second-hand couch, sitting close together like defendants at trial. I remained standing. You asked me for $125,000. We know it's a substantial amount, my father started. But we're prepared to offer collateral. We'll sign a formal loan agreement. We'd pay you back with interest once we get back on our feet.
How?
I asked flatly. You have no income. No license to work in your field. What exactly would you use to pay me back? I'm looking for other opportunities. Something will come through. At 66? With federal charges pending and your name destroyed in the financial industry? He flinched. Those charges are being negotiated. My lawyer thinks we can settle. Settle or not, your reputation is gone. You'll be lucky to get a job managing a convenience store. My mother spoke up, her voice small and pleading. Will you help us? That depends. I picked up the folder. I have some questions first. What kind of questions? Brett asked suspiciously. I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. Do you remember this conversation? May 12th, 4 years ago. I came to you and asked for $95,000 to save Theo's life. Do you remember what you told me? My mother's face went pale. Andrea, we've been over this. Have we? Because I don't think we've ever honestly discussed it. I held up a hospital bill. $95,000 for a bone marrow transplant with a 75% success rate. You told me you couldn't afford it, that you had to protect your retirement. We made the best decision we could with the information we had, my father said stiffly.
Did you?
I pulled out another document. This is a final invoice from Brett's wedding planner. Total cost of services, $320,000. Paid in full by you. 7 months after you told me you couldn't afford to save your grandson's life. Brett stood up. This is ridiculous. You're twisting everything.
Sit down.
My voice had an edge that made him obey immediately. I'm not finished. I laid out more documents on the coffee table, one by one. Venue in Italy. $110,000. That's more than what Theo needed. Flowers. $25,000. That's 8 months of his medications. Catering. $60,000. That's a full year of treatment. Vanessa's dress. $12,000. That's his medical equipment. Photography. $18,000. That's his hospital bills. Should I continue? What do you want from us? My father's voice shook. An apology? Fine. We're sorry. We made a terrible mistake. Is that what you need to hear? A mistake? I said softly. You think choosing a party over your grandson's life was just a mistake? We didn't know for certain he would die, my mother whispered, tears starting. Yes, you did. Dr. Chin told you directly. I told you repeatedly. I begged you with medical documentation in my hands. You knew, and you chose the wedding anyway. I pulled out a photo of Theo in his hospital bed, taken 1 week before he died. Tubes everywhere. His face gaunt. His eyes barely open. This is what $95,000 would have saved. This child. Your grandson. Look at him. My mother started sobbing. Brett looked away. My father stared at the photo, his jaw clenched. Jennifer, please, my mother said through her tears. We know we failed you. We know we should have helped. But we can't change the past. We can only ask for mercy now. Mercy. I placed the photo back down carefully. That's an interesting word. I don't recall receiving much mercy when I was begging for help. When I sold everything I owned. When I moved to the worst part of town to save rent. When I buried my son alone while you were getting your hair done for wedding photos. We came to the funeral. My father protested weakly. You came 50 minutes late and stayed for 18 minutes because you had a seating chart emergency. I pulled out the funeral guest book. See your signature? Time stamped 2:47 p.m. You left at 3:05. 18 minutes for your grandson's funeral. The silence in the room was suffocating. My mother cried harder. Brett stared at his hands. My father looked ill. But the funeral wasn't the worst part, I continued. The worst part was after. When you erased Theo completely. When you called Isabella your first grandchild. When you posted about how blessed you were. When you never once mentioned the grandson who died because you chose centerpieces over his life. I pulled out the screenshots. Every single one. My mother's Facebook posts calling Isabella her first grandbaby. Brett's Instagram about his growing family. My father's LinkedIn post about entering the best chapter of my life 3 months after Theo died. Not one mention of Theo anywhere. You deleted him from your lives like he was an embarrassment, like he was a problem that solved itself. My mother looked up, mascara streaking down her face. We didn't know how to talk about it. It was too painful. Too painful for you? My voice rose despite my attempt to stay calm. My son died, and it was too painful for you to mention him? You know what was painful? Holding him while he took his last breath alone because you had a dress fitting. Paying for his funeral with borrowed money because you'd spent $320,000 on champagne and flowers. Living every day knowing he could have been saved if you'd just cared enough. Andrea, Brett said, his voice hard and defensive. You need to move on. This anger is destroying you. Move on? You want me to move on?
Yes.
For your own sake. This bitterness isn't healthy. I laughed, a harsh sound that made them flinch. You want to talk about what's healthy? Let's talk about your bachelor party. $18,000 for a weekend in Sedona, while my son was dying. Let's talk about your engagement party. $15,000 while I was selling my grandmother's ring to buy medicine. Let's talk about your 3-week honeymoon in Bali. $35,000 while I was deciding whether to pay for Theo's funeral or my rent. That wasn't my decision, Brett said, his face red. I didn't tell them to spend that money. But you didn't stop them either. You didn't say, hey, maybe we should have a smaller wedding and help Andrea save Theo. You didn't offer to postpone anything. You just took everything while your nephew died. I turned back to my parents. Here's what I've learned over the past 4 years. You didn't help Theo because you didn't want to. It wasn't about having the money. You proved you had money. You had more than 3 times what he needed. It was about what you valued. And you valued a party over his life. That's not true, my mother said weakly. Then explain it. Explain to me how you had $320,000 for a wedding but not $95,000 for your grandson's life. Make it make sense. None of them could answer. The silence stretched on, broken only by my mother's crying. My father leaned forward. Andrea, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But are you really going to punish us now when we're desperate? Are you going to be as heartless as you think we were? Heartless? I picked up the check I'd written that morning. I'm going to give you $125,000. The change was instant. Hope flooded their faces, desperate and raw. However, I continued, there are conditions. Anything, my father said quickly. Payment terms, interest rates, whatever you want. It's not about payment. I set the check on the table between us. It was made out for $125,000, dated today. First condition, you acknowledge right here, right now, what you did. I want to hear you say that you chose Brett's wedding over Theo's life. That you had more than enough money and refused to help because a party mattered more than your grandson. Say it out loud. They stared at me. Brett looked at our parents, his face pale. You don't have to do this, he said to them. She's trying to humiliate you. Yes, I agreed. I am. Just like you humiliated me when I begged for help. When I had to stand at my son's funeral alone while you worried about table linens. My father's face went red, but he needed that check desperately. We chose the wedding, he finally said, his voice barely audible. We had the money, more than enough, and we chose to spend it on Brett's wedding instead of Theo's treatment. And he died because we refused to help. Because we valued a party over our grandson's life. Mom? I looked at my mother. We should have helped you, she whispered. We should have saved him. We were selfish and wrong. So wrong. I turned to Brett. And you? What's your part in all this? I didn't know they'd refuse to help you, he said quickly. I didn't know about the $95,000. Didn't you? You never wondered where $320,000 came from? You never thought it was strange that I couldn't afford a $500 bridesmaid dress, but they could spend $25,000 on flowers? You never questioned having a destination wedding while your nephew was dying in a hospital? He had no answer. Second condition, I continued. You take this money. You save your house. And you never contact me again. No birthday cards. No Christmas gifts. No phone calls. No emails. You remove me from your lives completely, the same way you removed Theo from your memories. You go back to pretending I don't exist. Andrea, you can't mean that, my mother said. We're family. No, I corrected her. We share DNA. Family is something different. Family shows up when it matters. Family sacrifices. Family doesn't let children die while they plan parties. I walked to the door and opened it. Those are my conditions. Take the check or leave it. You have 1 minute to decide. They looked at each other, having a silent conversation with their eyes. I watched them calculate. Watched them weigh their pride against their desperation. Watched them choose survival over dignity. It took them 53 seconds. My father picked up the check with shaking hands. We accept your conditions.
Good.
There's a document on the table. It's a legally binding agreement that you'll have no further contact with me. Sign it. They signed without reading it. My father's signature was barely legible. My mother could barely hold the pen through her tears. Brett signed with angry, aggressive strokes. When they finished, I collected the document and the pen.
You can leave now.
Andrea, my father started. You agreed to the conditions. No contact means no contact starting right now.
Leave.
They filed out in silence. My mother crying, my father's shoulders slumped, Brett walking stiffly beside them. I closed the door behind them and locked it. Then I walked to my computer and opened my email. I'd written this message weeks ago, waiting for the right moment. I composed an email to Aunt Linda and 30 other family members, attaching a comprehensive document I'd created. A complete timeline of everything. Every request for help. Every refusal. Every wedding expense. Every hospital bill. Photos of Theo in the hospital. Screenshots of them calling Isabella their first grandchild. The funeral guest book showing they stayed 18 minutes. Everything documented with dates, amounts, and evidence. Subject line. The truth about Theo and why I'm done. I thought you all should know what really happened 4 years ago, and why I'm no longer part of this family. The attached document contains everything. All the evidence. All the truth. Please share this with anyone who's wondered why I disappeared. Andrea. I hit send. By tomorrow, everyone would know. My parents' remaining friends. Their church. Their neighbors. Extended family they'd lied to about why I was absent. The truth would spread like wildfire through their social circles. The check I gave them would clear. They'd keep their house. But they'd lose something far more valuable. Their reputation. Their carefully crafted image of being generous, loving parents and grandparents. Everyone would know what they really chose.
What they really valued.
What kind of people they really were. An hour later, Brett was pounding on my door. I looked through the peephole and saw him, his face twisted with rage. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. That email you sent, he said, his voice shaking with fury. You can't do that. You're destroying them. I'm telling the truth. There's a difference. You're vindictive and cruel. You're ruining their lives out of spite. No, I said calmly. I'm giving them consequences. Actions have consequences, Brett. They made choices. Now they get to live with people knowing about those choices. Just like I've had to live with Theo dying because they valued your wedding over his life. They gave you $125,000. They gave me back a fraction of what they stole from Theo. And they only did it because they were desperate and had no other choice. If they weren't about to lose everything, would they have helped? We both know the answer. You're never going to forgive us, are you? Forgive you? I don't hate you enough to need to forgive you. Hatred requires caring. I don't care about any of you anymore. You stopped being my family the day you chose ice sculptures over my son's life. Now you're just people I used to know who happen to share my last name. Mom is devastated. Dad looks like he's having a breakdown. Was humiliating them worth it? Ask Theo if it was worth it. Oh wait, you can't. Because he's dead. Because they chose your party over his life. Brett's face contorted with anger and something else. Shame, maybe. You really are as cold as they said. Cold? My heart froze 4 years ago, and none of you were there. You were too busy planning your perfect destination wedding and your perfect life. So don't talk to me about being cold, Brett. You don't get to use that word. He turned and walked away. I closed the door for the last time on my biological family. Over the next few months, I heard through Aunt Linda what happened to them. My parents were socially destroyed. Friends stopped calling. Invitations dried up. Their church became too uncomfortable to attend. People they'd known for decades crossed the street to avoid them. The truth had gotten out, and there was no containing it. My father eventually found work as a consultant for a small firm, making a quarter of what he used to earn. My mother developed severe anxiety and started therapy. Brett and Vanessa moved to Colorado, trying to escape the scandal that followed them everywhere. Their holiday card stopped coming. I heard through Aunt Linda that my mother told new people she met that she only had one son, that her daughter had died years ago, that it was easier than explaining the truth. I supposed I was dead to them. The daughter who'd been grateful for scraps, who'd accepted being second choice, who'd swallowed her pain to keep peace. That person didn't exist anymore. As for me, I continued building my life. I dated eventually, carefully. Found someone who understood loss and didn't run from it. A widower named Daniel who'd lost his wife to cancer and understood that grief doesn't have an expiration date. We built something real together, based on actual values instead of appearances. I went back to school again, earning a doctorate in education. Got promoted to district superintendent. Made genuine friends who showed up when things were hard. Traveled to places Theo would have loved, scattering some of his ashes in beautiful locations. The Grand Canyon, Yosemite, the redwood forests. I lived for both of us. The $125,000 I gave my parents was worth every penny, not because they deserved help, but because it gave me closure. I proved I was capable of mercy, even when none had been shown to me. And then I walked away, leaving them to live with the weight of their choices and everyone knowing about them. Some people might say I was cruel. That real forgiveness means letting go completely, helping without strings attached. But those people never watched their child die alone while their families celebrated elsewhere. They never had to choose between electricity and medicine. They never had to bury their baby with borrowed money while knowing $320,000 had been spent on a party. I gave my parents what they asked for on my terms. I fulfilled my obligation as their daughter one final time. And then I closed that door forever, just as they'd closed the door on Theo when he needed the most. 3 years after giving them the money, I established a foundation in Theo's name. Started small, helping 1 or 2 families a year with medical expenses they couldn't afford. As my career advanced, as Daniel and I combined our resources, the foundation grew. We helped dozens of families, then hundreds. Each child we saved was Theo, living on. I never forgot the numbers. $95,000 versus $320,000. The cost of a life versus the cost of a party. Those numbers became the foundation's mission statement, its driving force. No parent should ever have to make the choice I faced. No child should die because their family valued appearances over action. 5 years after Theo's death, I was featured in Education Weekly magazine. Not as the mother who lost her son, but as a superintendent who'd created one of the most innovative special needs programs in the country. The article mentioned the foundation briefly, mentioned Theo, but focused on the future, not the past. I heard through Aunt Linda that my mother kept a copy of that article, that she showed it to people sometimes, trying to claim some reflected glory for my accomplishments. The irony was suffocating. I never responded to their attempts to reconnect over the years. There were attempts. A card when I got engaged to Daniel. An email when the foundation won a state award. A text when Daniel and I got married. I deleted them all, without reading past the first line. Brett tried one more time about 6 years after our last meeting. He showed up at my office, somehow getting past security. I had him escorted out, without speaking to him. He sent a letter the next day. Andrea, enough time has passed. We were all young and made mistakes. Isabella and Jackson ask about their aunt sometimes. Don't punish innocent children for our failures. Can't we find a way to move forward? I burned the letter without finishing it. His children weren't my responsibility. He'd made his choices. Now he could explain those choices to his kids however he wanted. The truth was, I had forgiven them in my own way. Not the kind of forgiveness they wanted, where everything went back to normal and we pretended nothing happened. But I'd released the consuming anger that ate at me those first few years. I'd stopped obsessing over their social media. stopped documenting their lives, stopped caring what they did. They'd become irrelevant to me, which was perhaps worse than hatred. 7 years after Theo's death, Daniel and I adopted a little boy named Marcus. He was 4 years old, had been in foster care since he was born, and needed a family who understood that love isn't about biology. We gave him everything Theo never got to experience: a childhood, security, parents who showed up. Marcus grew up knowing he had a brother in heaven. Theo's picture was on our mantle. We told Marcus stories about the brave little boy who loved dinosaurs and superheroes. Marcus learned early that family was about choice and commitment, not just DNA. My parents never met Marcus. They never knew I became a mother again. They knew nothing about my life except what they could piece together from occasional news articles or social media posts from mutual acquaintances. I heard my father died when Marcus was 5.
Stroke.
Sudden. Aunt Linda called to tell me, asking if I wanted to attend the funeral. I said no. I'd already said goodbye to him years ago. His death didn't change anything. My mother sent a letter after he died. Handwritten, 6 pages long. I almost threw it away, but something made me read it. Andrea, your father's dying words were about you and Theo. He said he'd made the worst mistake of his life. He said he was sorry every day. I know we can't change the past, but maybe we could try for future? I'd like to meet Marcus. I'd like to be a grandmother again.
Please. I'm alone now.
Brett barely speaks to me. I have no one.
Please. Mom.
I read it twice. Then I wrote back. 1 sentence. You had a grandson who needed you. You chose wrong. Live with it. I never heard from her again. Brett tried one last time when Marcus was 7. He sent a birthday card with a check for $1,000. The card read, "For Marcus, from his Uncle Brett. I hope someday you'll let us be part of his life." I sent the check back, torn into pieces with a note. Marcus knows he has an uncle. He knows that uncle chose a party over his brother's life. That's all he needs to know about you. The truth was, revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, about balance, about ensuring consequences matched actions. They taught me that love was conditional, that some lives mattered more than others, that money was more important than people. I simply returned their lessons, wrapped in a check they couldn't refuse and a truth they couldn't escape. And I moved forward into a future they'd never be part of, carrying Theo's memory with me, finally at peace. Not because I'd forgiven them the way they wanted, but because I'd built something beautiful from the ashes. Because I'd taken their worst choice and turned it into hundreds of lives saved. Because I'd proven you can survive the unsurvivable and come out stronger. My parents had spent $320,000 on a wedding that lasted one day. I'd spent years building a legacy that would outlast all of us. Theo's foundation would continue long after I was gone, saving children, helping families, making the choice my parents didn't make over and over and over again. That was my revenge. Not destruction, but creation. Not tearing down, but building up. Not becoming like them, but becoming everything they weren't. And every single child we saved, every family we helped, every life we changed was proof that Theo's life mattered more than their party ever could. That was justice. That was balance. That was the only revenge worth having. If this story hit you hard, hit that like button right now. Your support helps us bring you more real stories about family betrayal, survival, and the strength it takes to choose yourself when your own blood won't choose you. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. We share real family drama every single week, stories about toxic families, impossible choices, and the justice that comes when people finally get what they deserve. Drop a comment below and tell me, was Andrea right to help her parents but cut them off forever? Or should she have refused to give them anything at all? What would you have done in her situation? I want to hear your thoughts, and I read every single comment. If you know someone dealing with toxic family members or impossible situations, share this video with them. Let them know they're not alone. Sometimes the family you choose is more important than the family you're born into. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.